When my sister stood up in the middle of the family dinner and proudly announced she was pregnant, again for the 6th time, I felt the air leave my lungs. Everyone clapped and congratulated her, but I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the woman who had turned my life upside down for years. I wasn't shocked that she was having another baby. No, that was expected. What shocked me was the realization that she believed, deep in her heart, that I would once again step in to raise yet another one of her children. It wasn't just 1 or 2 times before. Each time she gave birth, the children slowly drifted into my care, first for a week or 2, then months, then years. I fed them, clothed them, tucked them in when they cried at night, and comforted them when they asked where their mother was. I became the parent they needed while she floated in and out of their lives, chasing boyfriends, disappearing for days, or crying about how overwhelmed she felt. And each time she promised, "This time will be different." But it never was. Now, watching her beam with excitement while I sat with tired eyes and aching hands, I realized I was being forced into a role I never signed up for. I had sacrificed my 20s, my freedom, and my peace for children who weren't mine, but whom I loved as if they were. Still, enough was enough. For the first time in years, I whispered to myself, "Not this time. I won't do it again." And with that decision, my life and hers was about to change in ways no one saw coming. The day my sister announced she was pregnant for the 6th time started like any other, but by the end of the evening, it had completely changed my life, or at least made me realize that it had already been running my life for years. We were sitting in the small, cramped living room of our parents' house, the air heavy with the scent of reheated food and the faint perfume my sister always wore, the one that clung to her clothes no matter how many times she washed them. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands resting on her slightly rounded belly, smiling like a queen about to receive a crown, while the rest of the family clapped politely and exchanged glances that said without words, "Here we go again." My parents were beaming, clearly thrilled that she was bringing another child into the family, and my younger cousins were whispering excitedly to each other about the new baby they'd probably meet someday. But for me, the news landed like a punch to the stomach. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth, and I could feel the tension creeping into my chest, heavy and suffocating, as I thought of what this announcement would mean for me, as if the room had shrunk around me, trapping me with memories of the past 5 pregnancies, the sleepless nights, the endless babysitting, the chaos that had slowly and silently become my life. I remembered sitting at my desk for hours, trying to finish an assignment while one of her toddlers clung to my leg, crying for attention while she, my sister, sat across the room scrolling on her phone, claiming she was too tired to help, too exhausted from life to do what every mother should do for her child. I remembered my own plans, the dreams I had tucked away in notebooks and whispered to myself at night, the ambitions I had paused because I had to pick up a child who wasn't mine, but who had somehow become my responsibility because no one else would step in. I remembered the first time she asked me, sweetly and with those big pleading eyes, to just watch the baby for a week, and how that week turned into months, the months into years, and how, over time, I had stopped asking myself why I had agreed in the first place, because refusing had never been an option, at least not in my own mind. Now, as she laughed and rubbed her belly, telling everyone she couldn't wait to meet her new little one, I felt a storm of emotions roiling inside me. Anger, exhaustion, guilt, and a strange, twisted love for her children that I couldn't deny. My heart ached at the thought of what she would expect this time. I knew her well enough to know that she would lean on me again, perhaps subtly, perhaps boldly, until I found myself once more in the role of parent to a child I had not carried, who was not legally mine, but who would inevitably see me as their mother because she had taught them to, because she had built a habit, a dangerous pattern that I was beginning to see clearly for the first time. I looked at her face, glowing with pride, and I wondered how she could be so oblivious to the sacrifice she had been asking for all these years, and yet, as always, I also felt a strange pull toward her, a compulsion to care, to step in, because it was what I had always done. But this time something inside me was different. This time I felt a clarity I had never felt before, a quiet but firm resolve that whispered, "Enough." I remembered the nights when I had cried silently on the bathroom floor, overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility, imagining what my life might have been if I had been free to pursue my own happiness, to make mistakes for myself, to live without constantly being the safety net for someone else's chaos. I remembered the nights when her children had crawled into my bed, frightened or sick, and I had held them while she slept through her own pregnancy, or went out, or did whatever it was that she always seemed to do, leaving the emotional and physical labor to me. The thought of going through it all again made my stomach twist into knots, and yet I knew deep down that she would expect it, that she would believe, as she always had, that I could not refuse her. That family meant saying yes even when my body and mind screamed no. I looked around the room, at my parents smiling obliviously, at my sister laughing, at my cousins bouncing with excitement, and I felt a moment of clarity so sharp it almost hurt. For the first time I realized that this time I could say no. The thought was liberating and terrifying all at once. What would she say? Would she hate me? Would she try to guilt me, as she always had, using the children as weapons, as if love could be measured in how much I sacrificed for her convenience? But the thought of sacrificing my life yet again, of losing myself to another child she created and then left in my care, made me feel a power I had never felt before. It was a power rooted not in anger, not in revenge, but in truth and boundaries. I had always been the responsible one, the caregiver, the one everyone leaned on, but I realized now that my love for her children did not mean I had to destroy myself for them. I could care, I could support, I could love, but I did not have to be everything for everyone anymore. That night after dinner I walked home through the cold streets, the winter air biting at my cheeks, and I thought about the months ahead, about the chaos that would inevitably follow her announcement. I thought about her past pregnancies, about the tiny humans who now relied on me for everything, about the sleepless nights, the homework struggles, the tears and the tantrums, the endless messes, and the way I had learned to navigate it all like a second parent. But for the first time I also thought about myself, about my dreams, about the life I wanted to live without being chained to another person's mistakes or irresponsibility. I sat at my small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, and I made a decision I had never dared to make before. I would not raise this child. Not this time. I would help her figure out what she needed to do, I would support her as a sister, but I would not step in as a mother because I had my own life, my own dreams, and my own limits, and for too long I had ignored them. As I stared out the window at the snow falling softly, I felt both fear and exhilaration. I knew she would be angry, that she would see this as betrayal, but I also knew that if I didn't set this boundary now, nothing would ever change. I remembered the way her eyes always searched mine when she wanted something, the subtle pleadings, the casual manipulations, the half-smiles that had always worked on me before, and I felt a strange surge of courage. I would not be manipulated this time. I would not let her expectations rule my life anymore. My heart was heavy with guilt, because I loved her children more than I could say, but my mind was clear. It was time to step back, to let her step up, and to finally put myself first. That night I made a plan, not cruel, not vengeful, just firm and practical. I would tell her the truth the next time we met. I would explain, calmly but firmly, that I could no longer be the safety net she relied on for her children. I would offer guidance, support, and advice, but I would not do the work for her. I would set boundaries she had never seen before, and I would hope that for the first time, she would actually take responsibility. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the distant hum of the city outside, I imagined the confrontation to come, the inevitable tears, the shouting, the guilt-tripping, and I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. For the first time I was preparing for a battle, but it was a battle to protect my life, my sanity, and my future, not to punish anyone else. And in that moment, as I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, I realized that this decision, this simple, terrifying decision, might be the most important one I had ever made, because it marked the end of a cycle I had been trapped in for years and the beginning of a life where I could finally live for myself without carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes. Next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that refused to loosen, a mix of fear, guilt, and anticipation buzzing through me like static electricity. I knew that today I would have to face my sister, the woman who had so effortlessly controlled my life for years without ever meaning to hurt me, simply because she didn't see the consequences of her actions. I made myself a cup of coffee, staring out the kitchen window at the pale sunlight filtering through the trees, thinking about how many mornings I had spent waiting for her to make a decision, only to end up picking up the pieces. I had replayed the conversation in my mind countless times. The words I would say, the tone I would use, the firmness I would maintain. I had imagined her reaction, her eyes widening in disbelief, her mouth forming the words, You can't just abandon me like this. And the familiar flood of guilt that had always washed over me when she said it. But this time I promised myself I would hold my ground. I had rehearsed how I would say it, how I would remain calm, how I would insist on her taking responsibility without turning into the mother she refused to be. The thought alone made my heart pound. When she called that morning, her voice light and bubbly, I could already hear the excitement in her tone, the careless energy that had always been so exhausting to me. She asked about the kids, casually mentioning the baby's movement, and I forced a polite smile even though I felt a flicker of irritation. I told her they were fine, that I had breakfast ready for them, and that they had already started their homework. She laughed that high-pitched, airy laugh and said, "Oh, you're a lifesaver, truly. I don't know what I'd do without you." I clenched the mug in my hands, my knuckles white, remembering all the times I had thought the same thing, and how it had come with no gratitude, no real acknowledgement, only a subtle assumption that I would always step in. "Sarah," I said, my voice a little firmer than I expected. "We need to talk." There was a pause on the other end, a small hitch in her voice, as if she had sensed the change in me but didn't want to believe it. I took a deep breath and said it again, more clearly this time. "I can't raise this baby for you. Not this time. I've done it before, I've helped, I've supported, I've been there for your other children, but this time I have to step back." The silence that followed was deafening. I imagined her sitting in her living room, mouth open, eyes wide, the words I had rehearsed dancing around her head, trying to land. I could hear her sharp inhale, the start of the familiar guilt-laden lecture, but I interrupted it gently but firmly. "I'm not saying I won't help in other ways, and I'm not saying I don't love your kids, but I cannot take over as their parent again. I need you to step up. You're a mother, and this child deserves you. They deserve a mother who will be present, and I can't do it for you this time." I heard her voice tremble slightly, a mixture of disbelief and hurt, and I could almost feel her searching for a loophole, a way to twist my words into a promise I had no intention of giving. But I don't have anyone else. You know I can't do this on my own," she stammered. I sighed softly, trying to keep my own emotions in check, because a part of me wanted to comfort her, wanted to remind her that I had been there before, but I had to be strong. "That's exactly why I'm saying this now," I said quietly. "You need to find a way. You need to take responsibility for this child, for your children. I'm not abandoning them, Sarah, but I cannot be their parent again. You know I've done it before and it's not sustainable. I can't sacrifice my life for another one of your mistakes." I could hear her inhaling sharply, her voice rising as she protested, her usual tactic of making me feel guilty beginning to surface. "You're being cruel. After everything I've done, how can you say this? They need you." I can't. I cut her off, feeling a surge of determination and exhaustion all at once. "No. You are capable and you have to do this. I will help you in ways that don't require me to live your life for you. You need to show up for your children. I've carried them in ways you haven't, but I can't do it anymore. I won't." There was silence for a long time, the kind of silence that stretches and stretches, filled with tension, anger, disbelief, and a subtle undercurrent of fear. I felt it in my chest like a weight being lifted slightly, a strange mix of guilt and relief. Finally she spoke, her voice low and shaky, almost whispering. I don't know if I can do it." I swallowed, my throat tight, and spoke with the patience I had built over years of navigating her chaos. "You will. You have to. And I'll help where I can. But the hard parts, the responsibilities, the sleepless nights, the constant attention, those are yours. I'm not taking them on this time." I hung up the phone slowly, my hand trembling slightly, because I knew this conversation was just the beginning. I knew she would fight back in different ways, emotionally, psychologically, maybe even by pulling the children away to guilt me, but I also knew that if I didn't hold my ground, nothing would change. I spent the day preparing, thinking about logistics, about how I would enforce boundaries without losing the kids or creating irreparable tension. I organized schedules, set up childcare routines that she would have to maintain herself, and even researched local parenting support programs that could help her step up. I realized, with a bitter taste in my mouth, that I had been doing this work alone for so long that I almost didn't know how to let go, but I also felt a thrill of freedom I had never felt before. That evening, she arrived at my apartment, unannounced as usual, her coat slung over one shoulder, the newest baby bump making her movements clumsy and awkward, and I felt a pang of both love and frustration. The older children trailed behind her, laughing and chasing each other, completely unaware of the tension building in the air. I greeted them, forcing a smile, and offered snacks and drinks, but I could feel her eyes on me, assessing, calculating, trying to find a way to push me back into the role she expected me to fill. I took a deep breath, remembering my resolve, and started the conversation again, this time in person, trying to maintain calm while speaking clearly. "Sarah, we need to be realistic," I said. "You can't keep relying on me to raise your kids. I've done it before, and it's not fair to me, to you, or to them. You need to be their parent, not me. I will support you, but I will not take over again." She blinked rapidly, her face a mixture of shock and hurt, and I could see the familiar flinch in her posture, the silent pleadings that had worked so many times before. But I held my ground, refusing to look away, refusing to soften, because I had to finally show her that I would not be manipulated. She opened her mouth, then closed it, as if she had no words, and the room filled with the sounds of her children playing, oblivious to the tension that hung like a storm cloud above our heads. I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness that she had never learned, relief that I was finally setting limits, and fear of what would happen next. For hours, we navigated the delicate dance of communication, with her trying to guilt me holding my boundaries, and the children innocently demanding attention and love that I had always freely given. I realized how much I had missed, how much of my own life had been on pause while I managed her chaos. And yet, even in the midst of tension, I found joy in seeing her try, even just a little, to step up. I offered advice, suggested routines, and reminded her gently of responsibilities she had ignored in the past, hoping that this time, she would truly understand the weight of her actions. By the time she left, long after dark, I was exhausted in a way that was familiar but different. Exhausted not because I had been doing everything for her children, but because I had been fighting a battle I had never fought before. Fighting to reclaim my life, while still caring deeply for the people I loved. I sat alone in my apartment, listening to the quiet hum of the city, thinking about the weeks ahead, the conflicts that would arise, the adjustments she would have to make, and the relief I felt knowing that, for once, the outcome depended on her, not me. For the first time, I understood what it felt like to draw a line, to demand respect for my own life and well-being, and it was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I knew there would be setbacks, tears, and arguments, but I also knew that if I didn't act now, nothing would ever change. And as I finally climbed into bed, exhausted but strangely at peace, I realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter. Not just in her life, not just in the lives of her children, but in my own life, where I could finally be free to care without losing myself completely, and where love would no longer mean giving everything until there was nothing left. The following weeks were unlike anything I had experienced before, a whirlwind of subtle confrontations, unexpected challenges, and moments that tested the very limits of my patience and resolve. My sister Sarah initially tried to act as if nothing had changed, walking into my apartment with her usual casual air. Her hair falling loosely over her shoulders, her eyes sparkling with mischief, and immediately expecting me to help as I always had. She dropped her bag on the floor, sighed dramatically, and said, "I don't know how you do it, seriously. How do you manage all of them?" I looked at her, carefully maintaining a neutral expression, and said, "I don't manage them for you, Sarah. I help them because I care, but you are their mother. You need to start taking responsibility." The words seemed to confuse her, and for a moment I thought she might argue, but instead she simply blinked, her usual confidence faltering slightly. Over the next few days, I noticed her attempting small, tentative efforts, making breakfast for the older children, helping with homework, and even packing lunches, but everything felt clumsy and half-hearted, as though she were testing her own limits while simultaneously hoping I would swoop in to fix her mistakes. I reminded myself repeatedly that this was progress, however small, and that my role had changed. I began to notice how the children reacted to her presence. The older ones were confused at first. They had grown accustomed to me being the authority, the one who fixed problems and answered questions. They would hesitate when she asked them to do something, look to me for guidance, and then frown when I didn't immediately step in. I could see the frustration in her eyes, the subtle guilt forming as she realized that my refusal to take over was causing ripples she hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, while helping her make dinner, she sighed and said quietly, almost as if confessing to herself, "I don't know if I can do this. It's too much." I paused, gently placing a hand on her shoulder, careful not to overstep the line I had drawn, and said, "I know it feels impossible, but you are capable. You've done it before. You just need to try, and I will be here to guide you, not do it for you." Her eyes filled with tears and she nodded, but I could see the resistance in her posture, the ingrained habit of relying on me that was not easy to break. Over the next several days, she made more concrete attempts. She woke up earlier to get the children ready for school, she signed forms for after-school activities herself, and she even helped the kids clean up the apartment without asking me to do it. Each small victory gave me hope, but it also reminded me how long it had taken for me to get to this point. How many years I had spent being the default parent while she drifted in and out of responsibility. One evening, the 5 older children were all gathered around the living room floor, working on a craft project, and she sat beside them, genuinely engaged for the first time in a long while. I watched quietly from the kitchen, my heart swelling with a mixture of relief and pride. It was a strange, bittersweet moment. Relief that she was trying, pride that I had encouraged her to step up, and sadness for the lost years when I had done all of this alone. But then came the small cracks in her resolve. She would leave tasks unfinished, walk away in frustration, or call me multiple times in a single day, asking for clarification, guidance, or sometimes, subtly, for help she didn't want to admit she needed. It tested my patience, my boundaries, and my resolve. I had to remind myself constantly that the goal was not to punish her, but to teach her that responsibility was hers and hers alone. The children, meanwhile, began to react in their own ways. Some of the older ones would whisper to me, asking if I would still help with the hard parts, the parts they were used to me managing. I had to explain gently, carefully, that they had to give their mother a chance, that this was her opportunity to step up and be the parent they needed. The younger ones, blissfully unaware of the deeper dynamics, continued to seek comfort from me when they were upset, and I allowed them the space to do so, but I avoided stepping into a full parental role. One afternoon, Sarah and I had a confrontation that made the tension almost unbearable. She had left the younger children unattended for nearly an hour, insisting she was busy organizing the nursery for the new baby, and one of the older kids had come to me, worried, asking where their sibling was. My anger flared not at the children, but at the situation, at the pattern that had persisted for years. When I confronted her, her eyes narrowed defensively, and she said, "I can't do everything at once. You make it sound so easy." I took a deep breath, speaking firmly but calmly, because I had learned that raising my voice would only escalate the situation. "I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's necessary. You are responsible for your children, and leaving them alone isn't acceptable. I can't do it for you anymore. You need to find a way to balance your life and their safety. That's the reality." She looked at me, stunned, her lips trembling slightly, and for the first time I saw a flicker of real fear. Not of me, but of having to face her own limitations. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes. She started planning meals in advance, setting up schedules for school drop-offs, and even communicating with teachers directly instead of relying on me to handle everything. She still struggled, still made mistakes, but she was trying. And slowly, the children began to accept her efforts, responding to her guidance without immediately turning to me. It was awkward at first, a hesitant dance of rebuilding trust and authority, but it was real and it was progress. One evening, she called me in tears, admitting for the first time that she had underestimated how hard it would be to care for her children while managing her pregnancy. She admitted she had always relied on me too much and that she wanted to do better. I listened, my heart softening, but I reminded her gently, "It's not about me, Sarah. It's about your children and giving them the stability they deserve. You can do this, but you have to commit. I will guide you, but I won't replace you." That conversation marked a turning point. She began to organize her life in ways she had never done before, using calendars, alarms, and checklists, and she involved the children in responsibilities appropriate to their ages. The older ones learned to help without my intervention, and the younger ones began to see her as a more consistent figure of authority. There were setbacks, of course, times when she faltered, when frustration got the better of her, when she nearly reverted to old habits. But each time I reminded her calmly, guiding her without taking over, encouraging without enabling. By the time the 6th pregnancy reached the midway point, I noticed a change in the family dynamic that was subtle but profound. My sister was present more often, making decisions herself, listening to her children's needs, and even asking for advice rather than expecting me to do the work. The children, in turn, responded with respect and patience, slowly learning to trust her again. And I, for the first time in years, felt a sense of freedom, of breathing space, of life that was mine to live. It wasn't easy. I still helped when truly necessary, and I still cared deeply. But the burden had shifted. I could see her struggling and growing simultaneously, and it filled me with a strange mix of pride, relief, and cautious optimism. For the first time I felt that the cycle could be broken. She could learn responsibility, the children could have stability, and I could reclaim my life without guilt or resentment weighing me down. There were moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I had been too harsh, if I had been unfair, if my insistence on boundaries would damage the family irreparably. But those moments were fleeting because every small success, every little effort she made, reminded me that change was possible. By the end of the chapter, I realized something important. Love wasn't about doing everything for someone else, even if they were family. Love was about holding people accountable, guiding them to grow, and sometimes stepping back so they could learn to stand on their own. My sister was learning slowly but surely, and I was learning too. That caring didn't have to mean sacrificing yourself, that boundaries didn't make you unkind, and that sometimes the hardest love was the love that demanded responsibility, honesty, and growth. And as I went to bed that night, exhausted but hopeful, I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years. That for the first time, our family could survive this new chapter without falling back into the old patterns, that my sister could rise to the challenge of motherhood, and that I could finally live a life that balanced love with self-respect, compassion with boundaries, and loyalty with personal freedom, all while watching the family I loved grow stronger, more resilient, and more real than ever before. By the time the pregnancy reached its final trimester, the tension that had simmered quietly for weeks finally boiled over. And it happened in a way I could never have fully anticipated. It began on an ordinary Tuesday morning, when I arrived at my sister's apartment to check in on the kids and make sure everything was running smoothly. I had not expected any drama, just a routine visit, but as soon as I opened the door, I was hit with a wave of chaos, the kind of chaos that had been a normal part of our lives for years. The living room was a mess. Toys scattered everywhere, crumbs on the floor, a stack of unfolded laundry threatening to collapse, and the children arguing over trivial things, yelling over each other in a cacophony of frustration and fear. Sarah was sitting on the couch, her hands pressed against her forehead, tears streaming down her cheeks, and I realized immediately that she was overwhelmed in a way she had never been before. She looked up at me with wide, panicked eyes and said, I can't do it, I don't know what to do. Everything is falling apart. My heart clenched because I knew she was telling the truth. Not the manipulative version I had heard before, but the raw, real panic of someone who had never fully prepared for the weight of responsibility. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Frustration that it had come to this point, sympathy for her struggle, and fear for the children who needed stability now more than ever. I knelt down to gather the younger ones, calming them as best I could, and tried to keep my voice neutral, careful not to step fully back into the parental role I had fought so hard to reclaim. Sarah, I said softly but firmly, I'm here to help guide you, but I cannot do this for you. You need to step up now. The children are scared, and they need to see that you can handle this. She shook her head violently, her sobs breaking through, and admitted, I can't do it on my own. I thought I could, but I'm failing. For a moment, I felt the old guilt creep in, the urge to rush in and fix everything, but I took a deep breath, holding on to the resolve I had built over weeks. You are not failing, I said gently, but you have to take control. This is your responsibility, and it's time to show your children you are capable. I will help, but I will not take over. You need to make decisions, organize things, and guide them. I will support you, but the action has to come from you. The room was silent except for the muffled cries of the youngest child, who had curled into my side for comfort. For a long moment, Sarah didn't respond, just shook her head and wiped her tears, clearly grappling with the reality of what I was saying. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded, as though the truth had finally sunk in. From that moment, the dynamics began to shift in ways I had only hoped for. She started to take action. Small, hesitant steps at first, like setting a routine for meals and assigning small tasks to the older children. But each action carried immense weight, a declaration that she was finally trying to rise to the role she had avoided for so long. I stayed close, guiding her when necessary, modeling patience, but refusing to step in and do things for her. The children, sensing the change, began to respond differently as well. The older ones, who had been used to me leading and rescuing, slowly started taking her instructions seriously, learning to respect her authority and understanding that she was trying. The younger ones still sought my comfort at times, but I allowed it without stepping fully into a parental role. Over the next few weeks, the tension became a rhythm of controlled chaos, a fragile balance that required constant vigilance and patience. There were days when Sarah faltered, when the laundry piled up again, when school forms went unsigned, or when a child was sent to school without a jacket, and she would call me, panicked, for help. I would guide her, calmly explaining how to manage the situation, reminding her that she was capable, and encouraging her to take ownership. Each success, each small victory, strengthened her confidence and slowly rebuilt the trust between her, her children, and me. One day, as we were preparing the nursery for the new baby, she turned to me with a hesitant smile and said, "I think I can do this. I really do." My heart lifted because it was the first time she had said those words sincerely, without manipulation, without guilt-tripping, without the expectation that I would instantly step in. That moment felt monumental, a turning point in a long, grueling journey. The final weeks of her pregnancy brought new challenges. She had physical discomfort, fatigue, and anxiety about the baby, and I watched as she navigated each obstacle with growing resilience. She asked questions, made mistakes, and sometimes broke down, but she also learned to problem solve, to organize, and to put her children first. I noticed subtle changes in her demeanor, the way she looked at her kids with more patience, the way she prioritized their needs without immediately collapsing in exhaustion, and the way she seemed proud of herself for managing what had once felt impossible. The children, too, began to thrive in this environment of slowly restored structure. They were happier, calmer, and more secure, because their mother was present, consistent, and engaged. They still loved me, of course, and I continued to offer guidance and comfort when necessary, but the balance had shifted. And then, the day came when the contractions started. I received a frantic call from Sarah in the middle of the night, and I rushed to her apartment, adrenaline pumping, heart racing, knowing that this was the final test. She was pale but determined, holding herself with a mix of fear and resolve, and I could see in her eyes that she was relying on herself, not me. I stayed by her side, helping her through the logistics, calling the hospital, packing bags, preparing the older children, but I refused to take over. I guided her, reminded her of breathing techniques, and offered encouragement, but I did not step into a parental role. She was in control. Hours later, after what felt like an eternity, she held the newborn in her arms, exhausted, crying, and smiling all at once. The children gathered around, eyes wide with awe and excitement, and I watched as Sarah cradled the baby, soft and careful, the weight of responsibility fully in her hands. She looked at me, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "I did it. I actually did it." I nodded, feeling a surge of pride and relief, knowing that she had faced the challenge head-on, that she had grown, and that the children were finally seeing their mother rise to the role she had long avoided. The days that followed were a blur of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and sleepless nights, but the difference this time was profound. She handled what she could, asked for guidance when necessary, and gradually learned to balance her new baby with her older children. The household, while still chaotic, felt alive in a new way, full of genuine connection, effort, and a slowly building sense of security. The children were calmer, happier, and more confident, and Sarah, despite exhaustion, carried herself with a newfound sense of pride and responsibility. I still helped when absolutely necessary, but the heavy burden that had rested on my shoulders for years had lifted. I could see her confidence grow each day, and the children responded with trust and affection, understanding that their mother was now truly present. And as I sat in the quiet of the nursery one evening, watching Sarah rock the baby to sleep while the older children played quietly nearby, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The cycle that had trapped me for so long had finally shifted. Sarah had learned, painfully and slowly, what it meant to be responsible. The children were thriving in the care of their mother, and I had reclaimed the life I had almost lost to years of unacknowledged sacrifice. I realized then that love was not measured by how much you gave of yourself to fix someone else's mistakes, but by how you held them accountable, guided them to grow, and allowed them to learn to stand on their own while still offering support. That night, as I left her apartment, exhausted but deeply content, I understood that the most difficult lessons were often the ones that produced the greatest growth. Sarah had transformed, the children had flourished, and I had finally drawn a boundary that preserved my own life, my own sanity, and my own happiness, all while fostering real change in the people I loved most. And in that quiet, fragile peace, I realized that the journey was far from over, but the foundation had been set for a new chapter. One where responsibility, love, and personal growth could coexist, and where I could finally be present in their lives without losing myself completely, a delicate balance I had longed for and had finally achieved. After the birth of the sixth child, the household slowly settled into a rhythm that none of us had expected but all of us quietly hoped for, a rhythm that finally reflected balance rather than chaos, responsibility rather than dependency, and love grounded in accountability rather than sacrifice. In the days and weeks that followed, I watched my sister grow in ways I had never thought possible. She learned to juggle the newborn with her older children, taking time to feed, soothe, and engage with each of them individually, while gradually organizing the household in a way that actually functioned. She still had moments of exhaustion, moments when the tears streamed down her face and the weight of motherhood threatened to crush her, but unlike before, she didn't give up or reach for me as a safety net. She began to prioritize her time, planning meals, arranging school activities, and even creating little routines for her children that gave them stability and predictability. The older children, who had once leaned on me for guidance and comfort at every turn, began to look to their mother first. I could see the subtle shift in their behavior. They listened, followed instructions, and even defended her in ways that were previously reserved for me. Their respect and love for their mother grew alongside her confidence, creating an atmosphere in the house that felt different, warmer, calmer, and surprisingly hopeful. I stayed nearby, offering advice only when necessary, acting as a guide rather than a parent, and it was strange and liberating to feel the weight lift from my shoulders. I could finally reclaim moments for myself without guilt pressing down on every decision, without the fear that my refusal to act would destroy the children's lives. One morning, while sipping coffee and watching the older children play quietly with their new baby sibling under their mother's watchful eye, I realized that for the first time in years I could breathe. The chaos still existed, of course, because children are rarely quiet and life is rarely simple, but it was controlled chaos, manageable, guided, and full of love from the person it belonged to. My sister even began to initiate small conversations with me that weren't about logistics, about crisis management, or about needing my help. She wanted to share moments of joy, of pride in her own accomplishments, of quiet victories that she hadn't been able to enjoy before because life had been so overwhelming. "I did it," she said one evening, her voice soft and tired but tinged with pride, holding the newborn gently in her arms while the older kids clustered around. I nodded, feeling a swell of relief and happiness, knowing that those words were genuine this time, not fleeting, not designed to manipulate, but honest acknowledgement of her own growth. The older children hugged her, smiled at her, and for the first time, I saw them truly see their mother as the anchor she was meant to be. I realized then that the hardest part of love had always been letting go, not abandoning them, but stepping back enough to allow others to grow into their responsibilities. Over the following months, the household continued to improve. Mornings were busy but efficient. The older kids got themselves ready for school, Sarah prepared breakfast and packed lunches, and the newborn was cared for with attention and consistency. I still visited and helped when necessary, but I no longer felt the constant tension that had defined our lives before. Instead, there was laughter, warmth, and a subtle pride in watching a family rebuild itself. Sarah even started to reach out to friends she had neglected, reconnecting with people who offered support and guidance, and the children seemed happier, more secure, and more confident in their place in the family. I noticed that my own life began to flourish as well. I could focus on my career, pursue hobbies I had abandoned, and maintain friendships that had once suffered under the weight of my constant caregiving. There was no guilt this time, only a quiet satisfaction that I had learned to set boundaries and that those boundaries had produced real, tangible change. One afternoon, as I helped the kids with homework while Sarah prepared dinner, she turned to me and said softly, "Thank you for not giving up on me, but also for letting me do this myself. I don't know if I could have done it otherwise." I smiled, feeling a deep, quiet joy. "You had it in you all along," I said. "I just needed to remind you." She laughed, a soft, genuine sound, and for the first time, I felt that our relationship had shifted from dependence and frustration to mutual respect and understanding. The children, sensing the harmony, began to thrive in ways that were remarkable. The oldest, who had always been quiet and hesitant, started taking leadership in small household tasks. The middle children began to show empathy and patience, helping their younger siblings without prompting. And the youngest, now a few months old, began to settle into predictable routines that made everyone's lives easier. I watched them and marveled at the resilience of children and the power of a parent willing to rise to the occasion. Over time, Sarah and I even began to share quiet moments that had nothing to do with childcare or household duties. We talked about our childhood, our dreams, and our fears, building a connection that had been strained for so long. I realized that by stepping back and forcing her to step up, I had not only helped her grow, but I had strengthened our bond in a way that years of taking responsibility for her children never could. There were still moments of tension, of course, when life felt overwhelming, when sickness or school issues arose, or when she doubted herself, but each time, she handled it with increasing confidence and skill. I was no longer the default solution. I was a guide, a support, a sister who could offer advice but who no longer carried the impossible weight of managing her life for her. And in those moments, I felt a profound sense of liberation, a freedom I had never experienced before, combined with the quiet satisfaction of watching someone grow into their role, flourish under responsibility, and truly love and care for the children they had created. By the time the baby turned 6 months old, the household felt stable, vibrant, and alive. There was laughter in the mornings, curiosity and playfulness in the afternoons, and quiet bedtime routines that reflected care and attention from a mother fully engaged with her children. Sarah had become the person she was always capable of being, and I was proud in a way I had never been before, not because I had done the work for her, but because I had allowed her to discover her own strength. The older children hugged me one day as I prepared to leave, smiling and saying, "We're glad you helped us, but Mom's really good at this now," and I felt my chest tighten with emotion. They weren't rejecting me, they were acknowledging growth and stability, and that acknowledgement meant more than words could express. That evening, as I walked home through the quiet streets, the city lights flickering softly, I reflected on the journey we had all taken. I realized that setting boundaries, standing firm, and refusing to let myself be consumed by someone else's neglect had been terrifying but transformative. It had been the catalyst for real change, not only for my sister and her children but also for myself. I understood that love and responsibility were not the same, and that sometimes the hardest love was the one that required letting go, demanding accountability, and standing firm even when it hurt. As I reached my apartment, I felt a sense of peace and contentment I hadn't known in years. The burden that had pressed on me for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet joy in seeing my sister thrive, her children flourish, and my own life regain balance and freedom. I knew there would be challenges ahead, as there always are in any family, but for the first time, I felt confident that we had built a foundation strong enough to withstand them. Sarah and her children had learned resilience, responsibility, and the value of effort, and I had learned the same lessons in a different way. The love I felt for them had not diminished. If anything, it had deepened, now based on respect, growth, and mutual care rather than sacrifice and obligation. That night, I went to bed feeling whole for the first time in years, knowing that I had done what was necessary, that my sister had done what she needed to do, and that together, we had created a family dynamic that could truly work. Life would continue to throw challenges our way, but I finally understood the meaning of healthy boundaries, the strength of perseverance, and the power of standing firm while still offering love. And as I drifted off to sleep, the soft sounds of her children's laughter and her quiet voice carrying through the walls of the apartment complex, I smiled, knowing that this chapter had come to a close in a way that was real, lasting, and transformative for all of us. Don't miss the next shocking story. Like, comment, and share your thoughts. Subscribe to Twisted Fate Chronicle for more twisted tales and dramatic twists.